What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Joe Patrick on football as we approach another Falcons primetime game coming up Sunday in San Francisco as the team travels out west to play the 49ers on Sunday Night Football this time, not Monday Night Football, where they obviously got a huge win over the Buffalo Bills, as we talked about on the field after the game on the last episode of the show. And I think Falcons Nation, Atlanta, the team, the locker room, the organization is floating on cloud nine right now after that result. It's just been, so uplifting, I think, for everybody around the organization, whether you are any of those parties I just mentioned, for any number of reasons. But first and foremost, just the way that this defense is playing. I mean, the defense has really been the story for this Falcons football team during the course of the season. And I think, I've mentioned it on the show, but I think it changes the calculus a little bit and the ceiling for what this team can be this year and going forward if this is the kind of quality you're going to get out of that unit. Because previously, the formula for this team to make the playoffs and be successful was for the offense to really carry the day and for the defense to kind of give the offense enough chances to win games. And really, it's kind of been flipped. That has been flipped on its head, where it's actually the defense that's allowing the offense just the ability to muster up enough points in order for them to get by some of these opponents. But it's really been a remarkable season in that respect. And you have to give credit to Raheem Morris. And I talked a little bit about this on the on that last episode that we did Monday night. You guys may have seen it Tuesday, surely, because it came out at about 1 a.m. And I sent out a tweet yesterday about it as well, and I figured I'd just kind of elaborate a little bit more here on it for you guys, which is, listen, when Raheem Morris was hired, it was an interesting hire because typically what teams have tended to do, unless you're an established head coach like a Mike Vrabel or something, is to go for an offensive play caller. And it makes sense. Like if you want to maintain some continuity over the course of many seasons, especially on that offensive side of the football, that's, I think, more tactical and more kind of complicated and more in need of some of that consistency, then it makes sense to hire a coach who's going to be around to call those plays, to lead that offense. And that's where we see a lot of the top coaches in the NFL, whether it's Kyle Shanahan, a Sean McVay, these are the elite play callers in the NFL. And so therefore, it was a little bit kind of unorthodox to hire a coach like Raheem Morris, who is the quote unquote, like the CEO, quote unquote, style of head coach. And I think that the selling point for Raheem Morris as this team's head coach was the guy's been around for a long time, first of all, like in the NFL. Just, obviously he had a head coaching stint a while back with Tampa Bay, and then obviously had an interim stint here in Atlanta a handful of years ago. But that's not really why he was hired. I think the reason why he was hired was more because of the way that he's seen the game evolve really since he's been a head coach over the last 20 plus years, going back to those Tampa Bay days where Tampa went from, a cover two, that Tampa 2 scheme that they kind of devised and perfected, and transitioned to a cover 3. Raheem Morris has been there, like not necessarily in Tampa for that whole transition, but has basically seen the evolution of football go from this like cover 2 to cover 3, and then from cover 3 to some of these more designer or fancy concepts with the matching schemes that he has had a lot of success with, and clearly won a Super Bowl as a defensive coordinator in St. Louis. But he's also been a part of and around some other amazing coaches, whether it is back to his Tampa Bay days with guys like John Gruden, to obviously when he was in St. Louis, he was around Sean McVay. But when he was in Washington, he was with Kyle Shanahan, that kind of like incredible coaching staff. And I wish I had it pulled up in front of me to talk about, but tons of future coaches on that coaching staff. Obviously, the coaching staff that was here in Atlanta in 2016 was very similar, where you have nearly a handful of staffers on that staff are now head coaches currently in the NFL, and some of which are really thriving. And so through all this, he's gained all this tactical experience, first of all, in just seeing the ways of the game. He's also developed a great network of coaches, and I've already seen people speculate as to like which coaches he could bring in next if, for example, like, if Zach Robinson were to move on after this season, to potentially Oklahoma State or anywhere else. Other coaches that Raheem Morris has worked with, I'll just say, like, the one I've heard rumored is like Mike McDaniel, if he is fired from Miami to come back and work for Raheem. But like, that's just a perfect example of why, Raheem Morris does have those relationships and has good relationships with a lot of those people. And but the reason why you hire him as a head coach is not just for the experience. Like, the experience is supposed to help, but ultimately, if he's your head coach, you want him to be looking at, obviously he's going to delegate. He's going to allow the defensive coordinator to do his thing, the offensive coordinator to do his thing. But ultimately, you want him overseeing this stuff and then being able to analyze, is the team doing things that are effective in this league? Is it doing things that are effective for our players? And I know that, like, a lot of people can, sense that it's not working. Like, for example, last year on the defensive side of the football with Jimmy Lake, it was not working. And it was frustrating to see the team kind of languishing in that respect. But ultimately, after you make the hire, you kind of have to roll with it to an extent. Obviously, teams can, make midseason adjustments. And, if you think I'm defending it, like, I asked Raheem Morris going into the bye week last year if he was going to kind of make any, I think the way I phrased it is like, are you going to, like, change any responsibilities on the coaching staff over the course of the bye week? Because that happened after that brutal game against the Denver Broncos, where it seemed like a clear issue for the team even at that point. And that Broncos game in particular was a bit of a disaster. He publicly said no. We don't exactly know if things did change to an extent behind the scenes, but Jimmy Lake was kept on. He kept his title as defensive coordinator at that point in time through the rest of the season. And I know that irked a lot of people because they felt like Raheem Morris should have been acting at that point. Now, whether that criticism is, legitimate or not is up to, the eye of the beholder. But the point is that then after the season, Raheem Morris did recognize the area in which his defense and his team was struggling, and that Jimmy Lake was not the fit that his team needed, and that he needed to bring something else. And in this particular instance, what that team needed was a coach that was going to come in and be, you don't want to say it's like simpler, because like nothing is simple in the NFL with the way that teams play, the way that schemes are devised and things like that. But in a way that the players were going to, a scheme that the players were going to be able to grasp and identify with. We talked about it on that last episode of the show we did, but these players feeling like they have the agency to quote unquote use their superpowers, as Jeff Ulbrich likes to say, with these guys. And just, it all felt actually a little bit too schemed up under Jimmy Lake, where he wanted to use so many different coverages, so many different kind of, I don't know if you call them exotic looks, but yeah, I guess you would say that. Just like, it's just very, very schemed up, and it left the players feeling like their hands are kind of tied. They couldn't really play freely, and now we're seeing a complete difference. And Jeff Ulbrich said it over the course of the offseason. He was asked about scheme and things like that. I believe it was during some of the OTA availability that we had with the coaches, if not his introductory press conference. And he basically just said, like, I would love to get up here and talk about how, smart I am and how, how much we can like scheme up a defense. But ultimately, you need the players in this league. You need the players who can go out and win one-on-one. And that's how you have good defense. And that's exactly the way that Jeff Ulbrich coaches. When you look at his track record of being a coach that really doesn't like to blitz, likes, his front four to just win, like what defensive coordinator doesn't. So that makes you think like, okay, well, how good is Jeff Ulbrich if he's just if he's just preaching about he's wants to win up front with four, like, obviously. But we're seeing it. We're seeing that actually has some merit to what he's talking about. And he's also adjusting from that. And look at, specifically that talking point I just mentioned. When you look at the blitz rate that he has this year, he blitzed Josh Allen more than he's ever, more than he's been blitzed since 2021, I believe, and to great effectiveness, obviously. And Jeff Ulbrich has generally been blitzing with the Falcons a bunch. And again, it's been working. And he's like, I don't even necessarily like to be a coach that does this. Like, it's not comfortable for me, basically, but it is working. They have the personnel to be able to do it. And it's not just Jeff Ulbrich. It's also Nate Ollie and the energy that he's brought for a young defensive front. These defensive linemen, I think, have been craving a coach like Ollie who, asks them to go out and do things that are, I think, just fun for them, frankly. Like, as defensive linemen, like, you like trying to penetrate and getting into the backfield and making plays, not just like standing up your opposing offensive lineman and reading them and trying to fill a gap that way. I think it's more fun for these guys to be causing the mayhem that Nate Ollie asked them to do. He asked them to do it with some different techniques that they may have never been asked to do before. And frankly, Jeff Ulbrich has even said, part of the training with this tactile front is to like deprogram them from some of the things they have been trained, just in terms of like the baseline techniques and stuff that they use as defensive linemen their entire lives up until now. So I think that's been also very engaging for some of these guys up front. And it's just, and this is why Raheem Morris, I think, deserves credit, because he understood that this is what this group, his roster, needed. These young players, they needed someone who was going to allow them to play in this style. Jeff Ulbrich is bringing a scheme that is allowing, is getting the best out of guys like Kaden Elliss again. Not that Kaden Elliss wasn't, very productive previously, but he's getting the best out of him. Jeff Ulbrich found, a player the Falcons could acquire in Divine Diablo, who is going to be incredibly effective. And he's talked about how he likes to have, those players who have some experience as safeties, frankly, which he had in Michael somebody. I forget the last name. With the Jets, but these are guys that are generally maybe not the most valued on the free agent market, that Jeff Ulbrich has been able to do great work with and really improve their careers, but also improve the teams they're on. So I say this all to say that this is the proof of concept of hiring Raheem Morris, of understanding the failing that the team was having in this certain area and addressing it. But the addressing is not just in, okay, made a bad hire, fire that guy, but it's also in firing the guy, but also understanding what his team needed, what a Ruke Orhorhoro needs to be successful, what a Brandon Dorlus needs to be successful, what a Xavier Watts needs to be successful, a player he wasn't even all that familiar with, et cetera, and then, be able to go out and find the talent through the network that he has. Obviously, he has a relationship with Jeff Ulbrich. Raheem Morris was dinged for hiring Jeff Ulbrich for that exact reason, but I think, and I've kind of always thought, that was the benefit of having Raheem Morris, and I think that we will probably continue to see him when coaches, come and go from this place, assuming that Raheem Morris is a successful coach and remains in his post here in Atlanta, to continue to hire coaches that he's worked with in the past. Why wouldn't you? That's the whole point of kind of hiring somebody who has the network and the experience that Raheem Morris does. So I think that it's obviously important for this team this year for their success to obviously have had this issue on defense corrected. But I also think for the organization, it's important to see this happen from Raheem. And I think that Raheem is kind of providing the proof of concept of who he is as a head coach and the value that he brings in that role, despite not having that play calling, aspect to his nature as head coach. And you would hope that, that what Raheem Morris can provide a level of stability for the team, even though he is not an offensive play caller and having the stability in that respect. So I just think it's interesting, and we'll kind of continue to monitor that and see how it goes. And it's not a week-to-week thing, but over the course of years, it'll be very interesting to see if this team can. I think, again, assuming that they have the success on the field they need to keep Raheem Morris around, if he can continue to kind of he said develop coaches. That's also part of his thing, is like develop the coaches that you have on your staff. So maybe if Zach Robinson leaves, I floated Mike McDaniel out there, but that's just like a rumor, frankly. Could very well be TJ Yates, and we could see how he does as a play caller. So anyways, there's lots to go there, but good stuff so far from Raheem Morris this year. Did also want to touch on another talking point for the Falcons this week, which is potentially trading for a wide receiver. Obviously, the wide receiver room has kind of been a bit shaky. We're seeing some volatility there with Darnell Mooney's, absences, having been hurt really since training camp for the majority of the season so far. Then it was kind of exacerbated with whatever happened with Ray McLeod this week. Raheem Morris called it a coach's decision as to not activate him. But even if he was activated, like, he's still not a number 2 receiver, never has been for this team. So, Casey Washington has been using that role. He hasn't really been a effective receiver. Obviously, he had a key block in Bijan Robinson's long 81-yard touchdown run. That was key on Monday. The Zach Robinson, the offensive coordinator, applauded to David Sills as well for the job that he did in the blocking game. If you notice, he's blocking in the end zone as Tyler Algier runs over a Buffalo Bills defender to score that opening touchdown, which is great. But ultimately, you probably do need some, receiving prowess from these guys. And it's not to say they can't do it, but are they just dynamic enough at this point in order to be those players, those complements for Kyle Pitts and most notably Drake London, who is getting the vast majority of the targets currently, with Darnell Mooney kind of sidelined or lessened to the extent that he is. And so do you need to trade for a wide receiver? And, this is all, I think Falcons fans are a bit programmed to feel like we have to go out and trade to acquire, to plug holes that we have on this team, because frankly I don't know if the trading necessarily, but going to the pro market has worked for this team much more often and at a higher rate than drafting players, frankly. Maybe until this draft. That's this draft class is a whole different story, but previous to this draft class, we talked about it in an episode about Terry Fontenot, which, by the way, we said he was an underrated GM. Go back and watch that episode. Just search 92.9 The Game on YouTube, or on your podcast list on Joe Patrick on Football, search like Terry Fontenot underrated, I think was like the name of it. Maybe right. But one of the things we dinged him for was just the fact that the second through 5th, 6th round picks, like, just really you haven't been finding enough quality starters there. That's been evident. I think that Falcons fans have understood that just innately, and they have also innately understood that some of the team's best players, like Jesse Bates, for example, Kaden Elliss, like, these are guys who the Falcons have picked up off of free agency in the pro market, that have been much more established players and capable of filling these holes. I think that's why, the impetus is like, okay, trade. We need the receiver. We got to trade for that guy, because we're not going to draft him for sure. Well, you're definitely not going to be drafting a lot of players to fill holes if you trade for a wide receiver now, because the team only has 5 picks in this coming draft, and a first rounder isn't even one of them, because they obviously had to trade that one away for James Pearce Jr. And I think they also don't have a 5th round pick, which they traded to move up slightly to draft Xavier Watts. So I think you're happy, you're fine without having those picks, considering the players that you got with them. But can you really afford to go into like next year's draft with 4 picks? I just don't think that they have the ammo that they would need to go out and trade for a wide receiver. They'd be better suited, I think, to scour practice squads and that kind of thing. Maybe you trade like a 6th or 7th round pick if you feel like there's somebody. But remember, this team got Van Jefferson a couple years ago for a 7th round pick swap, and Van Jefferson was not good after that. So, I just don't know if there's going to be someone who really moves the needle that the Falcons will be able to acquire. And I don't even think that the Falcons need to necessarily acquire anyone, honestly. Like, you've got Chris Blair on the practice squad. I believe he's still on the practice squad. But Darnell Mooney is going to come back at some point. He's limited as of right now. We're recording this on Thursday morning. He could very well be a limited or full participant again in practice. I kind of feel like he's on track to play. I say that with question marks. I have no idea, obviously, at this point in time, if he will. But he will come back. Ultimately, if it's not this week, it might be then the following week. He's going to come back at some point, in which case you don't want him necessarily buried. And something that we talked about on the show as well, like this team is definitely veering more towards a 12 personnel team. I know we've always thought of them as an 11 personnel team because that's what they were last year, but they are much more of a 12 personnel team now with the emergence of Kyle Pitts. Charlie Warner is maybe like a starter over Kyle Pitts at this point in time, just in terms of like how often he's going to be on the field. So I don't even think it's that big of a need for this team. Again, assuming Darnell Mooney is going to come back and be able to play here relatively soon. It's not like he's dealing with some long-term injury that's going to hold him out for a long period of time. If he were, then that would be a different story for sure. But I'm just going to pour cold water on that conversation. Last thing I just want to get out of here, I want to just talk about some numbies. That's what we're going to call this in this little segment. So just some fun numbers for the Falcons. First of all, just like some really good stuff with regards to pressures in general from a few players. James Pearce Jr. has generated 10 pressures on 67 pass rushes this season. That's the highest pressure rate among any of the 25 rookies with at least 50 rushes so far this year. And interestingly, Pearce has only been on the field for 106 of 262 defensive snaps. That's only 40%, just over 40% of the Falcons' defensive snaps. But he's been on the field for 24 of 28 third and longs, which is 3rd and 7+. So there's that clear role. You know, Raheem Morris always says role clarity. Well, there's that clear role for James Pearce Jr. It's exactly the role that I thought that he would have, and I think not that I'm special, but that's why I thought he was going to come in and basically be more impressive and arguably more productive from a pressure and sack standpoint than Jalen Walker, because I kind of assumed that Jalen Walker was going to be more of a run defender, more of an early down player where he can't really just kind of pin his ears back and go after the quarterback like James Pearce clearly can. I think that it's helping James Pearce, and I think that Jalen Walker has also been really, really good for the Falcons in that role. I know there's like a lot of YouTube film breakdowns of him doing that kind of stuff this week. He's also getting to the quarterback as well. He's been really, really good. I mean, both of these guys obviously have been really impressive, and I don't think any Falcons fan, like we said earlier, is regretting at all the trades that the team made in order to acquire any of these guys that they drafted in the last class. To get back to the pressures, let's also look at Kaden Elliss. Kaden Elliss leads the Falcons and all off-ball linebackers in the league with 14 pressures this season. Elliss also leads the Falcons with 7 quick pressures. That's a pressure that happens in under 2.5 seconds, which is tied for second most among all off-ball linebackers in the NFL. He has a 25.5% pressure rate. That's 7th among linebackers with at least 25 blitzes in those situations. Not that we didn't know that Kaden Elliss wasn't a great pass rusher and a great blitzer in that respect, but that is just great to see from him. And again, adding to why that I think Jeff Ulbrich is blitzing more than he maybe ever has. I don't know if that's actually true, but he's definitely blitzing a lot more than he has in recent seasons. And then Ruke Orhorhoro has generated 13 pressures across 84 pass rushes this season. That's 15.5% pressure rate, which ranks him highest among all defensive tackles with at least 75 pass rushes. So he was a big question mark coming into the season. I thought that my prediction for him was he was actually going to play more snaps than any of the Falcons' interior defensive linemen. I don't know if he's on track to do that, but he's certainly showing his effectiveness there. Basically the best interior pass rusher in the NFL. How about that? That is some good stuff. Orhorhoro has also been double teamed on 51.2% of his pass rushes. That's 11th highest rate among the same group of defensive tackles we're talking about, the ones with 75 pass rushes. Despite facing these frequent double teams, his pressure rate when doubled is 16.3%. That's actually he has a higher pressure rate when he's doubled than otherwise. It's the highest amongst defensive tackles with at least 10 double team pass rushers, obviously. So those are some impressive numbers from those guys. And it's not like the other guys aren't getting any pressures either. We see David Onyemata continually getting into the backfield. Jalen Walker, like we mentioned, is doing a decent job. Leonard Floyd has gotten there. It's good stuff. It's really, really good stuff. It's one of the reasons why this Falcons defense is so improved from where they've been. Going to the other side of the football now, did want to talk about an interesting stat from Michael Penix Jr., which is, actually a couple of things. One is that maybe this isn't that surprising. Everybody knew he's a pocket passer, but he has actually traveled an average distance, like during a play, at just 5.1 yards per dropback, which is the second fewest in the NFL. So obviously Kirk Cousins was the lowest in the NFL in this respect last year, and I think obviously the ankle, the Achilles had something to do with that, but it's not really changing all that much with Michael Penix. He's continues to want to throw the ball from the pocket, as we kind of knew, but he's the third highest pocket delivery rate with throwing 92.1% of his passes from the pocket. He'll be going up against Mac Jones this week, who is very similar in that respect. So just kind of interesting there. The thing that piqued my curiosity the most was that he's thrown an intermediate pass that's 10 to 19 air yards on 31.2% of his pass attempts this season. That's the highest rate in the NFL. And that's great, because that's exactly the kind of areas that you want to see him target. That is kind of the key area. I think that a lot of NFL coaches want their quarterbacks to go for. That's good. The bad part is that he's actually, like, his passer rating in those circumstances on these 31.2% of his passes has been really bad. 54.8%, 54.8 passer rating on those passes, which is the fourth lowest in the league. And also, interestingly, again, we talked about the deep ball was going to kind of be his thing. That's obviously his arm. It's what he brings to the table, and it is. He has a 4.9% deep ball rate, which is fourth lowest in the NFL, and he's only 1 for 9 for 43 yards on those deep balls. And I could tell you, just knowing that he's 1 for 9, that one was that deep ball to Drake London in that game against the Washington Commanders down the sideline, which was an absolute dot, by the way. But just interesting. Just interesting. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know if it's good that he's, like, throwing so often into that intermediate area despite at low efficiency, and he's not really targeting deep passes much whatsoever. But I don't know. He's still he's been okay. He's been fine. I mean, and I know some other creators, Kevin Knight, Aaron Freeman, Trayshawn Diaz. I know has talked with Kevin Knight about this. You got to kind of understand he's making his eighth. He made his eighth start. I believe it was his eighth career start against the Bills. So give the guy some time. Like, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect. Frankly, what the Falcons are getting is what they need right now. And obviously you want him to improve, and the Falcons will need him to improve from where he is. But he's in his eighth start. Like, again, I know Kevin made this exact point recently this week, but, like, it feels like the prime time for quarterbacks now is, like, in year 5. That's, like, kind of where the breakout truly starts, and where you really start to elevate as a quarterback. And so we're nowhere near that with Michael Penix at this point in time. Sticking on the offensive side of the football, another good stat for the Falcons. Ryan Neusel has allowed only 7 pressures this season across 177 pass blocking snaps. That's a 4% pressure rate. That's the 7th lowest among NFL centers. So I think that you expected that in the pass protection game, you weren't really going to lose much with him, between him and Dahlman. But that's even better than I would have expected at this point in time. So credit to Ryan Neusel. And then, you know what? We're going to say, like, Bijan. We talk too much about Bijan. I'm just kidding. Like, I say that like, he's the spoiled child who we're always just gushing about. We're so proud to show off to our friends and family. And that is true for a lot of different reasons. But what he's doing this season is obviously incredible. It's, he's on a record pace. Whether he should be keeping that pace, this season, I think, is a question when you talk about just, like, wanting him to be fresh for playoff games and for him to have a long career. I really do worry about his use, but you certainly can't complain with the production that you're getting from it. So we'll just leave it there. I might talk a little bit more about just kind of like his personality and stuff on the episode tomorrow, but we will be doing a game preview on the episode coming out on Friday. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys so much for engaging with the show as well. Love to hear from you guys in the YouTube comments where you can watch us on 929 The Game's YouTube channel. If you want us in podcast form on audio feeds, just search Joe Patrick on Football on the Odyssey app, if that's where you get your podcast. But wherever you get your podcast, just search Joe Patrick on Football. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon.